morning, everyone. Here we are. It's our 5th day of EUSIPCO. And again, we start with our plenary talk. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Ahmed Tewfik, who is going to give his talk virtually. He's 9 hours behind us. So Dr. Ahmed Tewfik served as the ECE Department Chair of University of Texas at Austin from fall 2010 through 2019. Dr. Tewfik combines a distinguished academic research record, entrepreneurial insight as the founder and CEO of a software company, and leadership experience gained through various positions with IEEE. His education includes a BSce degree from Cairo University, Egypt, in 1982, a master's degree in 1984, and SCD in 1987 from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Tewfik is a fellow of the IEEE. He received several awards and honors, including the IEEE Signal Processing Society Technical Achievement Award in 2018. IEEE Third Millennium Award in 2000, and Distinguished Lecturer of the IEEE Signal Processing Society in 1997, from 1997 to 1999. He was elected to the post of President-elect of the IEEE Signal Processing Society in 2017 and served as President in 2020 and 2021. Ahmed, are you ready? Just 1 second. Can you put it louder? Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. When I accepted to give the plenary, I was hoping to be in Belgrade with you this week. And in fact, I made plans with one of my coworkers who was born in Serbia. And he's there and I'm not. So hopefully there'll be another opportunity for me to come and visit soon. Second, I also would like to apologize because I wasn't allowed to give the original talk that I had planned for this session. There's a lot of back and forth. And in the end, I'll be giving a slightly different talk, and or actually a much different talk, and let me share my screen, which hopefully you'll find interesting. Okay.
Perfect. It looks great. Okay. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so again, apologies for all of these things, but I hope you find this talk interesting, and let's get started. So this talk really is about some work that was done by a number of groups over a period of time. And it's more forward-looking in the sense that at the moment, it seems to me that most of the work that's out there, most of the products that are out there, are really focusing on using machine learning or artificial intelligence to solve certain problems in which the algorithm or the system is looking at the environment. Maybe it's looking at pictures that you've taken and trying to recognize people in these pictures and then organize your pictures. Maybe it is taking your speech and transcribing it or trying to figure out what you want to do from it. And what we're looking at here is moving from the world in which we live today to one in which there is a symbiotic relationship between the machine and each of us, meaning that the machine starts to augment our cognitive abilities and capabilities. So why is that important? Let me start by asking 2 or 3 questions that hopefully will get your attention and help position the work and where we may be headed in the future. A little over 10 years ago, there was a huge accident in the Gulf of Mexico. British Petroleum had an oil rig, and there was an explosion on this oil rig. And when the explosion happened, unfortunately, a number of lives were lost. but it also led to an ecological disaster and an economic disaster that actually cost several $1 billion to fix. And when we reflect on this, you might think, or if you're not close to it, you might think that, well, this happened because something unusual happened on this particular oil rig, which led to this catastrophic event. About 10 years ago, again, a little over 10 years ago, we at the University of Texas started working with British Petroleum on the safety of oil exploration and oil rigs. And I got a chance to learn a little bit more about what really happened on that particular day. It turns out that what was happening is you had an oil exploration rig, and in the oil companies working offshore, they have smaller rigs that dig a number of wells looking for oil. If they do hit an oil reservoir, then they need to replace the exploration rig by a production rig. The exploration rig is much bigger than the production rig. It has all sorts of instrumentation that helps in digging and understanding the lay of the land beneath you. And it's much more expensive to operate than a rig that just extracts the oil from below the ocean surface. But before you can swap rigs, you really need to first cap or block the well that you dug, because otherwise all of the oil in that well will start to rush into the ocean. Now, the crew on this particular rig was out there for a number of months. They knew that this was the end of their assignment, and they were in a rush to actually go home. And so they rushed the job of capping the well with cement. And there is a whole process for doing this, which I'm not going to get into its details, for doing it in a safer manner. While they were doing this, there were a number of things that any even beginner driller would have picked up, but where the entire crew and the operating crew, despite their experience, did not pick up. So some of it is in the rush. They didn't use the right cement. Some of it is while they're going through the process of capping the oil rig, they started to see signals, and you remember they're monitoring the liquids that are in the well, and in particular in the connection between the well and the oil rig. They're monitoring pressure, they're monitoring the composition, etc. And they're doing that to make sure that the capping actually happened the right way. And in particular, there's no oil that's escaping or no gas that's escaping. And as they observed these anomalies, in their rush, they started to try to explain these anomalies, coming up with esoteric explanation for what was happening. When one of them, who was senior in the management on the oil rig, said, well, we better check. And they redid the check, and the check proved that there could have been a problem. The explanation was, okay, we didn't do the measurements in the main well. We did it on a side well. They have side wells that they use during that process. Let's not worry about it, and let's continue to do it. As they continued the job, again, many signals were indicating that things weren't going right. And again, after the fact, when there was an analysis of what happened, running all of these signals by, again, beginners, the beginners were able to pick up that something was wrong. And in the end, when finally somebody realized that something was wrong, the crew had essentially something like 7 or 8 minutes to live, and you had the accident. You might say, well, this never happens to me. But if you reflect on your own life, and maybe not you, maybe somebody close to you, I bet you that there were times where, for example, you were late to a particular meeting, getting out of home, and because you weren't careful, maybe you scratched your car, maybe you damaged your car, maybe you went through a red light, maybe you got in an accident. So these things happen to us all of the time. And they happen to us all of the time because we're in a rush, because we're thinking about multiple things. And because we try to come up with rational explanations for things that don't look right. And when we reflect back on these things, we say, how come we did this? How come I got into this accident? How come did I scratch my car? And the question that we're asking here is it possible for technology, the technology that we have today, perhaps technology that we can build tomorrow, for us to avoid all of these incidents? Is it possible for me, even if I'm in a rush and I'm thinking about all of these things, for an angel to look over my shoulders and maybe remind me to be careful, or let me know, slow down, or you're taking a curve too closely. Here's another one that's interesting. And a number of you traveled to Belgrade, so you were in airports and planes, etc. I could be on a plane. I have my noise-canceling headset on, and the flight attendant comes and starts to talk to me. And because my headset works so nicely, I am unable to hear the flight attendant. Wouldn't it be nice if my devices could be aware of my environment and could be aware of what it is that I'm trying to do and take certain actions on my behalf? So without me fumbling and trying to find the right button and press it, could the device be aware of the fact that my attention has shifted from listening to perhaps the movie that I'm watching or the music that I'm listening to trying to attend to a flight attendant, and then remove the noise cancellation and let me hear that person. As I'm running through the airport, it may be that, with my hands on my luggage, etc., but I have my phone in my hand, or I just look at that, say, my watch or whatever device I have. Could that device predict or understand that at that particular instant, what I'm looking for is my gate information, versus at that particular instant, maybe I'm looking for a particular restaurant close to me, or I'm trying to attend to a call from my wife. And again, it's not a matter of predicting by just knowing where I am. It's predicting by understanding the state in which I am. What am I thinking about? What is important to me at that particular time? Now, there are also other applications that are interesting and become perhaps not for all of us, but certainly for some of us. So, for example, if you start to look at medical type of applications, trying to manage certain conditions, you can think of people who perhaps through an accident had a severe vertebral column, and in which case maybe the nerves at a certain point have been severed, and there's no longer a connection between the brain and the rest of the body. Well, just as an example of that, if that were to happen to a particular person, then you lose control on your bladder. The bladder has two control systems. It has one local control system that we're born with, which essentially, if it fills up to a particular volume, then it voids. But when it voids, it doesn't necessarily void completely, and that leads to all sorts of issues and problems, including infections and the like. Now, the brain, because of the sensing that it does around the bladder, provides another control loop. And as we grow up, this is the control loop that allows us to decide when we would like to go to the restroom or not. And that's the control loop which, when working properly, allows us to void completely so that we don't run into these problems. So the question that comes in here is, if the connection between my brain and my bladder is severed, is it possible for us to reestablish an artificial connection and allow the brain to control the bladder again by having a two-way street between the bladder and the brain? So the sensing that's happening locally in the bladder sends the right signals to the brain, and the brain then sends the right signals to the bladder. If that happens, then of course our life would be much better. And I'll come back to that later in the talk. There are many other similar applications. For example, for a number of us, or for all of us, there is preliminary evidence that suggests that the electric signals in our body, and in particular in certain organs, can deal with some of the inflammations that we suffer from. So, for example, Crohn's disease. If there were local sensing done the right way, and somehow these signals are being interpreted not necessarily by our brain, but perhaps by machines that are working in conjunction with our brain and our human body, would it be possible for us to control some of these inflammations? So fundamentally, again, the question is, could a machine, could a computer working in conjunction with us to make our life better? One more example. About 20 years or so ago, a little less than 20 years ago, Garry Kasparov wrote a book on chess. I don't recall the exact date at this point. I would like to say 2002, 2004, somewhere around that time. And in the introduction to that book, he wrote about an interesting, quotes, experiment that happened. There was a chess competition that happened right about that time, which was a little bit different from the normal competitions or perhaps the virtual exams that were happening during COVID time, in the sense that while participating in this competition, the intent wasn't to make sure that Petar is actually playing chess. You're allowed to play as a team, you are allowed to play as a team plus a machine, or you're allowed to play as a machine or as an individual. By that time, we already knew that the best machines out there could beat the best human beings at chess. But interestingly, what happened in this particular competition was that it wasn't the best machine that won the competition. It wasn't the best professional chess player or master that won the competition. Actually, the team that won the competition was a combination of amateur players that didn't have the best machines, but they had the best interface between the machine and the human being. They had the best synthesis of human and machine, meaning that the machine was best at visualizing or surfacing options to the human being, and the human being had an easy way of inputting their thinking or their assessment of the situation to the machine. So this was pretty dramatic, and essentially it's pointing to the fact that if done right, human being plus machine can be better than human being alone or machine alone. Again, there will be situations in which the human being alone is perfectly fine. There are other situations in which the machine could substitute for us. But there are situations of great importance in our lives in which the combination of human plus machine can do better or has the potential to do better than human alone or machine alone. It turns out that this idea is not a new idea. It turns out that this idea actually started at the dawn of the computer age. So there is this very famous paper, Man-Computer Symbiosis, that was written a little before I was born, and which was talking about these potentials. If you read the paper, it talks about the tantalizing opportunity of interacting directly with our brain in order to accomplish certain tasks, or to understand where the environment around us. It also talks about, and this whole field talks about, the fact that the idea here isn't that we're substituting a machine for a human being. It is about, again, augmenting the capabilities of the human being. And in fact, the work that we were involved in with British Petroleum about 10 years ago was not about removing the driller, the human being, from drilling oil. It was about augmenting the capabilities of their drillers. This was a time in which the price of oil was high. The oil companies weren't finding enough people to work on these oil rigs. People were being promoted too quickly. They were being hired in junior positions too quickly without the right experience. And the idea was simply, can I make sure that a person who just began in her job or in his job is able to perform at the same level as someone who's been around for a long time? something I think that a lot of us can relate to as we're traveling and we're finding that air traffic control, airports, airlines, having shed a lot of their workforce in the last couple of years and hiring back. Now, a lot of the people that they're hiring don't have the experience, so things take longer, luggage gets lost, etc. So this idea of being in control, we as humans continue to be in control, is central to the scene. Now, for a lot of these ideas to happen, we require advances in sensing. And let me just go over some of the work that is ongoing at a number of academic institutions around the world and probably other labs around this particular theme. And these new types of sensing actually offer rich opportunities for those of us in signal processing, which I don't think we're working enough on. Let me start first with something that is not new and has to do with how, coming back to this connection between the brain and the machine that came up at the dawn of the computer age. And talk a little bit about where we're at this point in terms of sensing, at least where we were circa 2019. There are a number of ways that we can try to monitor your brain waves. Some you're familiar with, which are EEG, in which somebody's wearing a cap. You've seen pictures of that in the past. And so you have sensors that are literally on the surface of your cranium, from which you're picking certain electrical activities. It's great because it's not invasive. I'm not sure that I would want to walk down the street with one of these caps, but at least we're not drilling holes in my brain or in my cranium. And from that perspective, I'm happy with it. The signals that we get aren't the greatest. There are various ways that we can try to get better signals, better quality signals. So you've seen EEG caps that use JED, for example, to try to get a better signal. But fundamentally, because you're going through the cranium, through the bones in your head, and because of the distance between the sensor and your brain, there is a fundamental limit to how good the signal can be. Furthermore, there is a limit on the type of spatial resolution that you can achieve with an EEG. The temporal resolution is great, but the spatial resolution is. Now, to overcome these problems of spatial resolution, when you're dealing with monkeys or when you're dealing with humans that have certain conditions that drilling a hole in the brain and implanting electrodes is doable, there are other options that are used. These are used either in experimental type of work or like if you had certain epileptic conditions, etc., you might undergo a surgery that lead to implantation of electrodes. So one option is to put electrodes on the surface of your brain. So it is invasive, and then I'm going through your brain, through your skull, I'm going through the bone. But I'm not going into the brain itself. There are other sensing in which we actually implant electrons in your brain to get very localized signals and higher quality signals. This shows sort of another picture of this. And so again, you have an EEG on the surface. You have to go through the cranium. You have to go through soft tissues. So you're quite a distance from where the activity is happening. You have your ECOG, which is on the surface of the brain, or you can have these implanted electrodes, which literally are implanted in your brain. Although they're very close, because you're injuring the brain, there are chronic and acute reactions that happen, which also over time change the type of signals that you have. And for these types of signals, as far as monitoring brain waves, a number of us are working in this field, have been working on this field, and this field continues to advance. Now, again, 2019, 2018, and I was checking a couple of days ago, there are a number of academic labs that were trying to go for other ways of sensing. So if you go on Wikipedia, for example, you'll find that people are trying to develop EEG sensors that might sit in your ear or on your glass rims that may be less invasive, but of course the quality of the signals that you get will be much poorer. Now, how about things that are developing and where I believe there's much less work from our community? So here's a clip that I borrowed from Northwestern University. John Rogers is someone who was working on patches on flexible electronics from long time ago, from when he was at Bell Labs. There are a number of academics today that trace back to John. So either they were postdocs in his lab or they were students of John that are working in this field, including a number of my former colleagues at the University of Texas. So let me play this clip, and then I'll say a few words about what. This is not futuristic in the sense that this is sci-fi. A number of these labs have produced these patches. If you put these patches in the right location, they can measure things like the composition of your sweat, which may be important for physiological reasons, but it is also an indirect signal that talks about our emotion or our state of mind. By analyzing the chemicals in my sweat, you can tell whether I'm nervous, I'm happy, I'm awaiting some anxious, and so this is why I happen to be anxious. You can measure electroconductivity on my skin, which again can give us some measure of how I'm doing. And from my perspective, it seems to me that there's not enough work on our side, meaning on the signal processing side, on interpreting these results, on sensing and interpreting these results and incorporating them in trying to then have a system that does something or other. Here is another piece of work that started at MIT almost 10 years ago. You've seen work from maybe some of our colleagues on this particular topic. This is a line of work in which you're using RF signals, and in particular incidental RF signals. We're talking about using Wi-Fi signals as opposed to some other RF device that is designed specifically for that. And using Wi-Fi, you are able to tell what is happening in another room. You're able to tell how I am walking. You may be able to tell how I'm breathing. And by collecting all of this information, again, you can assess something about my condition. You can assess something about my medical condition, like you can detect whether my gait has changed, and therefore maybe that's an indicator of something that may happen to me, or simply my state of mind, what I'm thinking about, what I'm trying to do, and then act accordingly. Oops, I'm having I'm not going to read the entire clip, just give you an idea about it. Okay, so I'll stop here. You get the idea. There are preliminary indications, again, out of MIT, that by using these types of signals and monitoring you on a daily basis, we could perhaps predict that you may be developing a stroke. At least there are some examples of that. Now, in order to bring this new advanced sensing into something that can help the human being, we need to be able to also model the human being. I mean, I have to, at the very least, for example, be able to go from this chemical analysis to an understanding of, my state of mind, my emotions, etc. Sometimes it is more complicated and sometimes it's less complicated because in certain instances or in certain applications, what I'm trying to get at is what is my state of mind at this particular point in time? What am I experiencing, and what could the machine at that point in time do to assist me? So as an example, again, referring to the work that we were doing with British Petroleum about a little over 10 years ago, what we were trying to do is get at the actual decision-making that a human being is doing at a particular point in time, and trying to understand also the dynamics between different human beings when you have teamwork. And you might think that this is, terribly difficult, and you would be right, because if I try to model how my brain works, it probably will be hopeless. But on the other hand, as a field, we have had already experiences in doing that. So, if I do my math correctly, maybe 40 years ago or more, as a field, we started to develop more and more advanced audio, image, and video coding techniques. The reason that these techniques worked were because we were able to come up with mathematical models of how our hearing works or how our vision works. Not quite, what is happening at the elementary cell level and how this is integrating and then how the brain is processing it. But we were able to come up with a model that's sort of an end-to-end model. Like if there's signal coming in, what parts of the signal am I able to hear distinctly? What part of the signal are masking other parts of the signal? So if I make errors in representing these parts, basically by encoding them and introducing errors that way, the listener is not going to pick them up. More or less like F equals ma, which is a global model. It doesn't get into the quantum mechanics of what is happening at that level. And we were quite successful with that. So the challenge here is to try, if this was of interest to you, to model a decision-making, to come up with some sort of end-to-end model that's complete description enough for you to complete your task, but yet not so complicated that it requires a supercomputer to run, etc. In this particular context, what we needed to do is come up with a model that captures cognitive biases, captures the fact that we as human beings, when we make decisions, the order in which we see the data makes a difference. So, for example, a doctor that is seeing your results will make a certain decision if she sees it in a particular order versus another order, or a great doctor who sees a number of patients who all have flu and then sees another patient that has something else is very likely to say that that patient has a flu as opposed to the something else, even though that something else was easy to diagnose. This problem is this is the only slide that has equations in the talk. So there are ways, for example, to go from the optimal Bayesian approach for making decisions in a binary hypothesis testing case to incorporating what we know about the cognitive biases that humans have. The picture is more complicated because the algorithm, like if I'm a pilot and there is an autopilot on my plane, the autopilot doesn't necessarily know my experience, my training, etc. I don't know how the autopilot was designed. We tend to trust machines, and that's the reason that very often we get into accidents. This is the reason that many of the Tesla cars get into accidents, because we overtrust the technology. And there is one more complication. This complication is the information that I have, my prior knowledge, is not necessarily available to me immediately. So again, it may have happened to you during this conference. You run into someone that you haven't seen in a long time. It could be that you don't recognize the person at all, or you could, the only information that comes to you is, I think I've seen this person, but it takes you a while before you remember the name or you remember where you saw the person. I guess at the conference you have the badges, so you know the names, but it might take you a while to do this. So again, in a context of the oil rig example, I, as a driller, may have experiences in a nearby field or in a similar situation, but as something was happening at this particular instant of time, it may not come to me obviously. If I see some other information, it might come to me, and now I have additional information, and working with the machine can make a better decision. This is a slide that is meant to just maybe dig a little bit deeper into these cognitive biases and why they happen, why these accidents happen. There is a theory that Dan Kahneman developed a long time ago, which is perhaps a reasonable explanation of how things go. We think that we're rational decision makers. We think that every time we get a piece of information, we analyze it to death, and then we come up with answers to what's going on. Actually, that's not quite the way it works. If we were doing this, we would be spending a lot of energy, because our brain uses a lot of energy, and actually our brain is pretty slow. So we would be slow making decisions, and we probably would not be alive today. We do have a system, and actually all the animals have this system, which we inherit, which essentially, when it sees some evidence, does a shortcut. I mean, it does a pattern matching, and I know what to do, so I react very quickly. Most of the time, this is great. Like if I touch a hot cup, I don't have to analyze, is this hot enough and is it going to burn me? I pull my arm immediately. This is not something I think about. This is not something that I'm taught as a kid. It is, I am born with it. It's the same thing that happens with, birds and tigers and all sorts of animals. There are certain mechanisms that we're built with that allow us to do these shortcuts and make these decisions. It is great. Without it, we would not be around today, because if we were analyzing scenes, back in the cave age, animals would have probably eaten us. And as I said, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing today. Very rarely do we actually use our analytical capabilities. Our analytical capabilities burn a lot of sugar, a lot of energy, and they're quite slow. And you know that because if you are in a situation in which you get involved, let's say at the end of the day, in doing a lot of analytical work, you go home and in between you haven't had the chance to replenish your energy. And you may do things that you normally don't do, or you may say things that you normally don't say. And it's because you've lost this energy in doing your analytical work. And now the control mechanisms that control what you should say, what you can say, what you shouldn't say, are no longer there. And you might say something hurtful to your companion. Now, there is a little work, not much work, on understanding all of these physiological and psychological characteristics of a human being, and also understanding the machines and trying to understand how to put them together. So this is an example of work that came out of BU back in also fall of 2019 approximately, in which they're asking the question, if I have a machine and if I have a man, or actually I have a number of people, how should we sequence the decision? Like, should I put the machine at the beginning, or should the human be at the beginning? Should the human be making the final decision, or should the machine be making the final decision? It also applies if I have a sequence of human beings. So for example, if there is an election going on, and I, like, say, in the United States, and I'm on the West Coast, and if the results on the East Coast start to show, is this going to affect whether I vote or not, or how I vote, or they won't? And should I be open to being affected or not being affected? This is a complicated problem. I think there is a lot of work that still needs to happen, and it's an interesting field to continue to look into. Let me skip the slide and talk very quickly about the work that we did with BP. The idea was pretty simple. Work was complex, but the idea was pretty simple. You had the oil rig. We had all sorts of sensors on the oil rig. We had all sorts of algorithms that took these sensors and tried to figure out what was going on. We were sensing the human being who was taking the action, and we were also trying in a second phase to sense the group of human beings who are involved in this action. You analyze all of this information, you have the models for the human being, and we didn't have at the time the model for the group of human beings, and that helps you decide how to nudge the individual, what to show to the individual, what to suggest to the individual, so that you get them to think the right way. And we were able to demonstrate that it was possible to get better results. I'm not going to go into this curve, but essentially under certain conditions, you're able to show that either the human being can perform better, in the sense that on average, maybe they'll make their decisions faster with better accuracy, which is great, so you save money, or they will make the right decision as opposed to the wrong decision if you do the combination correctly. And you're able to detect correctly the biases that they're experiencing at a given point in time. Another piece of work that's sort of related to this is going back to the what-if questions that I was asking, trying to control a capability from a human being that has lost it. So this is an interesting clip that was taken from the World Cup, the opening of the World Cup in 2014. It was done by Duke University. They have one of the most prominent neuroscientists, and that person comes from Brazil. The World Cup was happening in Brazil, and the challenge was to try to demonstrate that by monitoring the brain activity of a paraplegic, you can actually help that paraplegic actually take some action. So that person without the machine is unable to take certain action. In this case, the goal was to help that person take the action by interpreting their desire and then making it work. And let's see if this... you got it, but what happened is the person who's paraplegic, who can't really move his feet, was able at the right time to just kick the ball. He didn't walk across the field, but it's still a beginning that tells us something about where we may be headed if we do things right. There is even more tantalizing research that continues and was also happening around 2019, in which by embedding electrodes in the brain of a human being, we could detect the intent of that human being. And by detecting the intent of that human being, we could give them the capability of generating speech. This is, one of the first results in that particular field was published in Nature magazine in 2019. Subsequently, and I couldn't talk about this in this talk because I was asked to not talk about anything after 2019. One of my students at UT Austin, working with a lab that teaches people to to learn how to speak after accidents, was also able to show that by analyzing the voice, the sounds that one is producing, and monitoring EEG, we could actually assist in producing the right speech. Some of the work that we were doing back then focused on other problems. We all know that if I'm using, I don't know, I'm trying to dictate to my computer or to my phone in a noisy environment, ASR generally doesn't work as well. We've all experienced it. You get more errors, exception. But while you're doing this, so your machine is listening to your speech, but you're also listening to your speech, or you're listening to me while a machine is listening to me. And the idea here was, is it possible to combine you with the machine to get better results? And it turns out that that's possible. We demonstrated this back then on limited vocabulary. And I'll skip this slide and actually show you how this works. So I'm going to play this video. What the video will do is it will show you text. In this particular slide, we were asking the subject to read the text. So the person is speaking. The person also listens to what she or he said. And we're monitoring what they said. And we're monitoring it. We're monitoring also their brain activity through EEG, and trying from that to then detect what it is that they were hearing. So the person sees this was easy for us. The decoded is this was easy for. The second one, Jane may earn more money by working hard. And you'll see that the earlier decoded output is incorrect, but with spell checking, we almost get it. So this, if I combine this with the decoding that's happening on my machine, there is hope for correcting what the ASR is doing and getting it right. This is another case where it's the passive listening. So in this case, I am not speaking. In the previous case, our brain activity is picking up what I'm trying to say and what I'm hearing. Here, it is just picking up what I'm hearing. So when it says this is the test message, basically we play it out. You don't say it loud, but we still collect your EEG and try to guess what you heard. So to some extent, it's working. The errors are larger because we're picking less evidence. In the previous case, you were speaking, so we're picking that evidence in addition to what you heard. In this case, we're not picking that. One more thing before I close. We were also involved in work on trying to understand what you're trying to attend to. Like, are you listening to me or are you listening to another person that happens to be in the conversation with us? Or in the context of the earphones, are you listening to the music or are you trying to listen to me? And then there were some incidental effects that we also picked up during that study. So interestingly, when we asked people to just speak and we were monitoring their brain waves, we could tell from that, and they were speaking in English. Obviously, we were at UT Austin, so it was English. We could tell whether the speaker was a native speaker or a non-native speaker with fairly high accuracy. Also, we could tell with reasonable accuracy what you were trying to attend to. And we were doing this by reconstructing what possibly the signal that you're attending to looked like from the brain waves, like trying to get the envelope of the signal or the spectrogram of the signal, and then trying to match it with the different sources that we separated. And we could do it with reasonable accuracy. So let me close by saying that there are a number of promising technologies that we can combine with the work that we signal processing are doing or should be doing that have the potential of dramatically changing the way we work and the way we live. They have the potential to make us more productive, to make us make maybe fewer errors. They have the potential to help us manage some of the conditions that we have. And again, the story here is different from the story that you normally hear in the media. So there was a wave in which, AI is here, machine learning is here, it's going to put many of us, if not all of us, out of business. What we're saying here is that that's not quite true, that the next wave actually will make us more valuable because the combination of us as a human being plus the machine is likely, not in all cases, but in many cases, many of the creative cases, will make us more capable than the machine at any point in time. That we will always be ahead of the machine if you have this right combination. This combination and the opportunities are not all medical. Some of them are medical, and almost all of the work at this point, or the majority of the work at this point, is happening in the medical field. But a lot of these applications are non-medical. They can affect our everyday life. Again, they maybe prevent us from getting into accidents. They may prevent us from buying the wrong pair of shoes, or maybe prevent us from marrying the wrong person. So, or giving us an ability to take certain jobs that we couldn't do before. So I think this is a field where, again, we as a community are not as active as we should be. I think we should get more involved in many of these applications. It's an opportunity to develop new techniques, to think afresh, and hopefully to have a good impact on society at large. And with that, I close, and thank you for your attention. And again, apologies that I'm unable to be with you physically today.
Thank you, Ahmed. So now it's time for questions. Are there any questions from the audience here? Yes.
Okay, good evening, Ahmed, and thank you for the very illuminating talk. And greetings from Belgrade as well. So recently, if you guys heard the news, there was an IT company in China that announced that they would have a humanoid or a bot as their CEO. So I don't know about the legal implication of that, having a boss as a robot or a bot. But I like the proposal that you have where we try to equip the expert or the real human CEO with the machine that would help them make the right decisions. I wish Nokia had that in like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, back in Tampere and in Finland. But my question is the following. So when we equip these expert with the machine, with the bot, is there any problems or worries that there will be some sort of manipulations in terms of selecting some specific information in order to control or manipulate the decision makers? So I'm leading a little bit towards ethical issues, which you have not mentioned in your presentation. Thank you.
Actually, this is a great question. And yes, there are privacy issues that are implicated. There are, potentially in the future, if we wake up to this, also regulatory protection that we can get. This is not new. So in this particular case, the machine can influence you. I can try to bias you towards a particular decision, again, by showing you the right information. I can invade your privacy if I'm able to monitor some of your signals. But this is not new. So, for example, why is it that people spend money, like a car company or a watch company, or in the old times, a cigarette company, tries to make sure that the actors in a movie are using this specific car or this specific watch, or this specific computer. Why is it that when you have movies that treat certain topics, they bias people in a particular way in terms of their political views? I mean, the movie might be presenting a simplistic version of what's happening out there. It is because while we're watching these movies, the biases that we have, or our ability to think about what we are getting what we're hearing and accepting it or not is fairly low. Generally speaking, we as human beings tend to trust other human beings. Again, otherwise we would not have survived. I mean, we need to learn from others and learn from their experience. And there is evidence that if I tell you, I mean, there are experiments that were done in which I show you a couple of statements, one is right, one is wrong. I show you the right one in green and the wrong one in red. But if I show you a lot of the wrong statements, you will make the wrong decision at the end. You know, for example, if we pretend that you're a judge and you're going to give me a sentence, and we show you a bunch of statements, some of them are red. So we're telling you that these are wrong. These are fake news in a sense. You will still be biased and make the wrong decision. So this is an absolute problem, but it's a problem that exists today. It's not a problem that that doesn't exist. And you could use the technology the right way in terms of be careful, from what you saw. They're trying to manipulate you, or we could use the technology to actually manipulate you.
There's one more question.
My question is more specific. You were talking about detecting what a person is thinking, and you said that that was related to the person thinking in English, that you could tell native speakers from non-native speakers. So this detecting of thinking is based on a language. Can you detect a person, what is a person thinking if a person thinks in French? Or I don't
think that. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead, Ahmed.
I don't think that what you were detecting was that the person was thinking. I think what we were detecting is when it's your mother tongue, likely, I mean, I'm hypothesizing here, what happens is you think and then you speak, and it's direct. When you're a non-native, there's probably a tendency in some cases to think in a particular language and then do some sort of translation to play it back. If you're not a good speaker of a language, you know that this happens. But likely, even if you're a good speaker, there is some remnant of that we're detecting. So we were not detecting necessarily that this was in English versus non-English. I think because of the limitations of the experiments in which everybody was speaking English as opposed to, maybe we had some native French speakers or, we had Chinese speakers, for example, but we didn't have other speakers speak Chinese who were non-native Chinese speakers. I don't think that we can extrapolate from that we were necessarily picking up a particular language.
Thank you.
There's one more question here.
Hi, Ahmed. Thanks for an interesting talk. This is Olga. So I know that the group at Berkeley, led by Galland, did a lot of experiments on trying to figure out what kind of image, and then this goes back to Milica's question, what kind of image a person is seeing at a certain time. So, but there is some training involved. You would present the person with the collection of images, make some MRI recordings, and then let them select an image and look at it and then decide what kind of image or which image are they looking at. So it involves a lot of training to get to a point where the results are really outstanding. So what kind of training process is required if you're going beyond images? Because this was, in my opinion, a really great idea that Galland had, but it's very focused on a sub-collection of images. And once you start going beyond the collection of images used for training, results become a little bit iffy. What kind of training process is needed to get there, to get very good results?
So, for the images, there may be, I'm not too familiar with the work, but it may have been, trying to understand how we view images, how we interpret what are the images. There was earlier work, probably again about 20 years ago, that DARPA was promoting, in which without much training, the goal was to try to see if you can combine a man or a human being, with a machine, you can get better results. And so the point was, if I show analysts photographs and I'm looking for tanks under camouflage, or I don't know, missiles under camouflage, if I show you a lot of these images quickly, can I detect the fact that you've seen an object? To put it in another perspective, sometimes, it happened to me, you're driving, you're thinking about something else, you see a red light and you still go through the red light. Okay, you saw the red light, but you did not react to it. So is it possible for us to detect the fact that you saw the red light and at that point intervene? And if you collect enough data, like if you build these sort of machine learning type of algorithms, it turns out that at least in the controlled experiments, I don't know how much you can extrapolate from that, there is evidence that you can pick some of these signals. So it doesn't require that I train you, but it requires that I understand the signals. Now, from that, there may be training in that if you work with a particular algorithm or a system that I develop, there may be some training or some adaptation from the human to the machine and the machine to the human to get the best performance, which is sort of something that what happened with this chess experiment. So I would differentiate between trying to understand how we see, what we interpret, and that could have bearings on how we build our machine learning experiments in which maybe there's training, from other tasks that don't really require much training, that I can put the machine and deploy it on you. You don't have to be trained, at least for some things, and then you might learn to work better with the machine.
More questions? I have one question, Ahmed. So yes, cognitive enhancement is an important area of work, in particular for people who with neurological disorders. But on the other hand, you mentioned also in your presentation that maybe sometime soon we will have machines that will help ordinary people with, say, improving their system one from your presentation. So what I mean by this is, say, someone who is an expert in music, in particular part of music, type of music, this person would be would easily judge or make a decision if what is heard is very good or not so good, and so on. And then when a person who is not the expert, of course, will be kind of handicapped. So now you have a machine that will help this person who is handicapped to immediately understand the quality of the music. So are you aware of any work that is focused on this system one, or in particular maybe that is focused on the concept of intuition, how to improve intuition of people by machines?
So this, to some extent, was part of the goal for the BP project that we were involved in, which was trying to understand, not by coming up with rules and what if, and trying to how experts behave in a particular scenario. Like if you have an expert driller, can I take the experience of that expert driller and somehow help nudge someone who's not an expert perform the same way? Like if a particular driller is able to drill a well in I don't know, 3 hours, or to cap a well in 1 hour, can I take a novice and get them to that level? There is some of that that is possible, but keep in mind that if, as I improve the performance of the novice, actually the system that I build can also improve the performance of the expert. So in some sense, I don't think, if things are done right, you won't necessarily be able to close the gap. So, if there's a ranking, you preserve the ranking, but the worst performance will be better than what it was before.
Thank you. It's 10:38 here. So, Ahmed, thanks once again for your talk. Let's congratulate.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and hopefully I'll see you soon or at some point.
For you, it's time to go to bed now.
Yeah.
Bye.